Our main character, Chloe, is having her hair cut. She has long, straight brown hair, but the stylist can be seen cutting it shorter and shorter. The next scene shows a gynecologist examining her privates and tells her that her chronic stomach problems are psychological. She recommends that it will be best if she sees someone who specializes in psychotherapy. Chloe used to be a model but is currently unemployed. She's 25 and lives alone with her cat Milo. She decides to take a bold step and meet with a psychotherapist. She walks into Paul Mayer's office as recommended by her gynecologist. She walks into the reception and patiently waits until he calls her into his office, where she explains the consistent abdominal pains she's been battling with. She has visited several specialists before and even changed her food system, yet the problem persists. However, many have told her it's a psychological issue. Just as the popular saying goes, the abdomen is the body's second brain. After sharing all her issues and challenges, Paul assures her that they will find out the cause of all her pains. The session wraps up, and Chloe takes her leave afterwards. A different day comes and she's back at his office for another session. Chloe reveals that she had a dream about him. In her dream, she sees Paul holding a medal against her and attempts to defile her. Paul sits quietly and listens to her. They have several sessions after that, and he always lets her do most of the talking so she can finally speak her mind and get to the point where it hurts. Chloe finds it quite comfortable talking about all the things she's bottling up, especially the strained relationship she and her mother had before she passed away. She shares how traumatic her childhood was, having to grow up with her grandmother, and then her mother was like a total stranger to her. There's no connection whatsoever between them, and sometimes when she imagines her passing and funeral, she feels nothing. Days later, Chloe gets a job as a watchwoman in a museum. All she has to do all day is watch the numerous people who visit the museum, and the job comes with decent pay. It's kind of funny and weird at the same time. She comes for her session as usual, but this time with a piece of good news. She tells Paul about her new job and thanks him for giving her confidence. She reveals that her stomach has not hurt for a week now, but she's afraid she's healing too fast, so she prefers to stay fragile. She looks at Paul in a certain way that gets him to bow his head and let a fake smile display on his face. His body language suggests there's something he has in mind, but then he remains cool. During one of their sessions, Chloe confesses that she now feels good, and since she has nothing to say, Paul suggests they stop their sessions already. He reveals that he is starting to harbor feelings that are inappropriate as she is her patient. He offers to recommend her to a colleague, but she refuses and gets up to take her leave. On second thought, she turns back to look at Paul, who is now standing. She stares into his eyes and asks if he doesn't think he has cured her, because it seems he might just be the remedy she needs, not anyone else. Their emotions get high, and they wrap their arms around each other as they begin to kiss. Paul and Chloe become a couple, and they decide to move in together. While unpacking, she finds a box with Paul's name on it. Chloe takes a look inside and finds quite an interesting revelation, which leaves her in surprise because he has never mentioned it. Paul comes back home, and while having dinner, he notices her mood seems off. He asks her what's wrong, and she confesses that she feels like she's standing in front of a man she doesn't know, despite him knowing everything about her. She asks him about an old passport she found among his things. In the passport, Paul has a different name, and it makes her wonder why he is not telling her anything about it. He explains that the reason he has not mentioned it before is because it's not important. He explains that he used to have his mother's last name, but then realized that Paul Mayer sounds better than Paul Delord, so he decided to change his name. With that clarified, they get into the bedroom after dinner and begin to enjoy some intimate time. Milo comes running and watches them in a very awkward manner as they are making out. While they are on the bed, Chloe asks him to promise not to hide anything from her again. Paul smiles and agrees to it if she will promise to stop searching for his things. The following morning, she wakes up to find Paul ready to leave for work. He kisses her goodbye and runs off to the hospital, while Chloe gets up and prepares to head for the museum. On her way back from work, she sees Paul talking to a lady as the bus drives past. Chloe stares at them with questions on her face. Someone seems to be getting insecure. During dinner, she tries asking where he has been during the day. Paul is not giving her answers, so she yells at him in frustration, demanding why she saw him with a woman in a place entirely different from the hospital. She gets up to leave the table, but Paul embraces her and informs her that it might just be someone who looks like him. He tries to calm her down as much as possible. The next day, Chloe decides to stop by the place where she saw Paul the previous day, and to her surprise, the address placard says Louis Delord. She brings out her phone and takes a snapshot of the name and the description on the placard. Upon getting to work, she calls the number to book an appointment with the psychoanalyst, pretending to be Eva Martin. She gets home later at night, and her friendly neighbor Rose stops her and greets her. It seems that Milo annoyed Paul earlier, and he sent the cat out of the house. Luckily, their kind neighbor took Milo in. As scheduled, Chloe arrives at Louis's office for her appointment. She accuses him of being Paul. He realizes that she must be an acquaintance of his brother, so he clarifies that he is indeed Paul's brother. Chloe is surprised at seeing the identical twin of her lover. She begins telling her story just like she did with Paul, but somehow, Louis sees through the lies. He tells her that he can only heal her if she stops lying. He asks her to stop lying about her sister because she's an only daughter, and she should stop saying her mother has passed, just because she's wishing deep inside for the woman to be really gone. Louis is the exact opposite of Paul. Although they look alike, character-wise, Paul is nicer. Louis, on the other hand, is more macho-looking and without glasses. Chloe is intrigued but at the same time irritated because Louis is mean, brash, and foul-mouthed. She picks up her bag and angrily pays him the 150 euros for his service before walking out. Louis naughtily asks her not to mention meeting him to Paul. Later in the evening, Paul brings her some coffee and asks why she looks so sad. Chloe tries to get words from him thinking he'll say something about his twin, but Paul doesn't give her any of what she wants to hear. She keeps on trying until the following morning. She even asks him to know why he changed to his mother's name. Paul asks her to sit down and explains how his father's name got soiled in some shady case. The incident made his parents move to the United States, and when he decided to settle down here, his father was the one who suggested he use his mother's name. Well, he sounds convincing enough, and Chloe believes his story. Later that day, Rose comes with a cake she baked. She wants to share some with Chloe, so she asks to be allowed into the house. While they are eating, Chloe asks for her to let Milo stay at her place for some time because Paul isn't comfortable with having the cat around. After Rose leaves the house, Chloe searches through a record of psychiatrists and decides to pick the name Agnes Wexler. She goes back to meet Louis again for another session, and this time, it is brief. Louis calls the session off barely before she even says anything, and he requests for his fee. Chloe just lightly kisses his lip and hands him the cash before walking away. When Paul comes back from the hospital later that evening, he asks about the new doctor she's seeing, and if she is able to help her. Chloe says that her new doctor Agnes, the name she picked from the record earlier, assures her of a lasting solution to her stomach problems. They soon begin to make out, and in the process, Chloe imagines Louis walking in and even imagines all three of them being intimate together. The following day, she visits Louis again. After all, he bragged about his methods being better than Paul's, so Chloe wants to find out if it's true. Or maybe she's oddly attracted to him as well. Louis welcomes her and leads her to what looks like a bedroom in his office. He tells her to take off her clothes so they can move to practical sessions. Chloe refuses, but he moves close and gradually fondles her breasts. He can tell that she has some kind of attraction and desire for him. He pulls her close to his chest and starts to pleasure her using his fingers. Chloe pushes his hands away, but he continues. She's not consenting, nor is she outrightly stopping him from going ahead. Louis suddenly pushes her to the bed. As she pants, he tells her she'll have to enjoy it next time and walks away from her. Chloe keeps a straight face while she buttons up her shirt. The next day, before going to work, Chloe stops at Louis's office once again. She's about to explore her fantasy. She walks in and finds Louis on the bed looking ready for her. Without saying a word to each other, she undresses, and in no time Louis is giving it to her like she has never had it before. Let's hope she won't be faced with a difficult time choosing between both brothers. Unlike Paul, Louis is not so gentle during course. After the session, he asks Chloe how she liked the experience. Chloe goes on to pick up his tortoiseshell cat. It's obvious he's a lover of cats, unlike Paul, who isn't quite comfortable with having Milo around. In a very eerie way, Louis explains the complexities of his cat's DNA, saying that it's a rare species of twin cat. He relates it to human twins that are vicious just like the creature, and they can carry their twin's fetus. Awkward guy, I must say. Seems as though he's giving her hints about his relationship with his brother. She gets back home and suddenly decides to go check on her cat. Unfortunately, Rose informs her that Milo has run away, but she's hoping it'll return. Rose apologizes and assures her that cats can be like that sometimes. However, just in case it returns, she intends to leave her door open for Milo. On a cool evening, Paul takes Chloe with him to an event where he and some other of his colleagues in the profession are present. Chloe mingles and tries to find out a thing or two regarding twins like Paul and Louis from some doctors. She smiles like she's just intrigued by the topic while she listens to all they have to say. Moments later, they decide to leave the event early. On the ride home, Chloe suddenly asks Paul to park the vehicle. She runs out and throws up by the roadside. She lifts her head and finds Louis walking towards her from the woods. When she turns to look at the car, she sees Paul wearing a confused look on his face. Chloe breaks into a run while the imaginary Louis continues to follow her. Paul drives in pursuit of her until she falls to the ground. He picks her up and takes her into the vehicle, still wondering what's wrong with her. Could Chloe be hallucinating, or could it be that she misses Louis so much already? The next day, she meets with Louis for their sessions again, and while they are making out on the bed, he suggests that she loves his brother less than him. Chloe clarifies that with him, she only knows of course. She finds it difficult to even know who she is more attracted to, because when she's with either of them, she thinks of the other. Later that night, Chloe and Paul are both reading a book. He asks her what she's thinking about, and moves to kiss her. Seeing that they might just end up getting intimate, she tells him that she's on her period. Paul lets her be, and gently pulls back. The next day, as soon as she opens Louis's office bedroom, he rushes towards her hungrily. Chloe gets off the bed in shock at hearing him address her by her real name. Louis reveals that he has always known who she is, but he is amused by her lies. He begs her not to reveal their affair to his brother. However, she tells him that it's time they put a stop to what they are doing, because his brother acts like he doesn't even exist. Louis explains that his brother denies him and wants to be the only child of their parents, and their only favorite. Chloe just stands there listening to him explaining the kind of complex relationship he shares with his brother. Later that evening, Chloe and Paul are having dinner, and he starts up a discussion about her therapist. He wants to know how things are going, but Chloe lies that she doesn't like Agnes because she's always wanting to please her, and she always thinks about her, instead of him. Paul assures her that it's a good sign, and she'll have to persevere through it all. For fear that Paul will start suspecting something, Chloe goes straight to work the next day. She didn't stop by Louis's place like she usually does. He calls her on the phone to find out why she didn't show up. After she explains, he tells her that he will be expecting her the next day. The following day, Chloe shows up, and after making out, Chloe comes up with a suggestion. Since his therapy method is to explore her repressed desires, she informs him that she'd like to do him in. Louis scoffs and tells her that she will not be doing that with him. They soon start talking, and Chloe is quite amused to find out that Louis is 15 minutes older than Paul. Although they are mirror twins, Louis is the dominant one. It brings tears to her eyes as she listens to how he describes Paul as the weaker twin, right from when they were in their mother's womb. Later that evening, Chloe and Paul step out to a fancy restaurant in town. She seems excited as she shares with him the progress in her sessions, and after applying his advice and how she's beginning to have a better understanding of herself and him. Paul starts to give her some medical advice, and she puts her hand over his mouth. She softly reminds him that he's no longer her psychotherapist, but her lover. Paul smiles and kisses her hand softly. He then asks her to marry him all of a sudden, and Chloe's face radiates with a smile as she stares sweetly into his eyes. They soon step out into a sex store to purchase some items. It seems Chloe is trying to bring out a different version of Paul and satisfy her desire. When they get back home, she wears a rubber male private part, and they stand facing each other. She rubs some lubricant on it and gently turns him around as she inserts it deep into him. It's Paul's first time, but what matters to him is that he's doing it for her. Maybe Paul isn't as weak as Louis thinks, or maybe he's just a nice lover boy. Who knows? During her session with Louis the next day, he observes her and finds out that she's carrying a child as he rubs his hand around her abdomen. He teases her, seeing that she might be finding it difficult to tell his brother about the baby since she isn't sure who among the twins is the father. Chloe shuts him up and asks him to spill what he did that made Paul shut him out of his life. She tells him that she's pregnant, and Paul wants to marry her. Chloe seems to be provoking him when she asks if it's him who is really obsessed and hates Paul, who might just be the real dominant twin. Chloe seems to be stirring troubled waters. Louis gets pierced by her words, and he looks like he's going to devour her. He asks her to leave, but Chloe keeps throwing words at him, in rage. He rushes at her and pushes her to the bed as he slaps her and calls her all sorts of foul names. Chloe succeeds in picking up her clothes and quickly walks out of his place, breathing heavily as she goes. Chloe gets home deep in thought. She sits down and soon finds Milo's hair on the couch. The next day, she visits the gynecologist for an ultrasound, and it seems her doctor discovers something. Chloe stops going to Louis, and he decides to call her one day. Unfortunately, Paul is around, so she answers the call away from where Paul is, and she shuns Louis. However, he is insistent on seeing her. He apologizes for his behavior and asks to see her at their usual meeting spot the next day. Paul soon approaches, and she lies to him saying it's a colleague from work. The following day at the museum, Louis comes to visit Chloe, who unsuspectingly thinks it's Paul. She follows him out for lunch, and he gives her a cat-shaped brooch for her birthday. She bends over the table to kiss him, and that is when she realizes it's Louis. He's forceful and refuses to let go of her. She pulls back and curses him. Louis chuckles, and he's now sure she has mistaken him for his brother. Chloe angrily throws her glass of wine on his face and moves to walk out of the restaurant. Louis pulls her back and tells her to ask Paul who Sandra Schenker is. Interesting. Who might this Sandra be? At the house, Paul brings her a cake while singing happy birthday to her. She blows out the candle and opens her present to find a beautiful ring in the box. Later, the both of them are in the sitting room, and Chloe brings up a fake story of an old friend named Sandra, hoping he'll say something. His phone soon rings, and it's the taxi that will be taking him to the airport for a conference. She asks him how long he'll be away. Chloe's baby bump is becoming more obvious in loose-fitting clothes, but it seems Paul hasn't noticed. Once Paul is gone, she goes through his stuff and finds a love letter from Sandra and a photograph of both of them. She decides to search more and calls the number she found. Sandra's father picks up. Chloe finds out that Sandra has been in an accident. Chloe lies about being Sandra's old schoolmate so she can have access to visit Sandra. The next day, she finds her way to their address, and Sandra's mother welcomes her in. She shows Chloe around and takes her to see Sandra, who looks pale and sick. Chloe looks at Sandra lying weakly on the bed. She looks as if she's going to pass out any moment. Suddenly, Sandra's face transforms into hers, and the face looks at her meanly in such a way that makes her lose balance. Chloe excuses herself and steps out of the room immediately. Sandra's mother follows behind her and offers her tea to make her feel better. They soon start talking, and the woman reveals that Sandra and Paul were a couple. What's surprising is that she even knows about Louis. Chloe listens attentively as the woman reveals that Louis had gotten Sandra drunk while pretending to be Paul and made advances on her. Paul found out that something happened between Sandra and his twin, and he was so enraged that he hated his brother and refused to see Sandra again. This led Sandra to attempt to take her own. Mrs. Schenker notices Chloe's look and begins to suspect she must be involved with the twins and accuses her, saying she must like having an affair with both of them. She begins cursing Chloe, who quickly excuses herself to take her leave. As she drives off, she realizes a car is following behind her. She drives straight home, and at the apartment's parking lot, a strange car chases after her and almost hits her. She gets to her doorpost to find an envelope. The strange person is coming after her as the light bulbs begin to go off and on. Could it be Louis? Or maybe she's just hallucinating as usual? Upon getting into the house, she reads a note she suspects to be from Louis. He states that he and his cat are offering her their hearts. She opens the tiny box and horrifyingly finds a small heart in it. She closes the box in horror. Chloe looks terrified as she looks down from her balcony to find a car parking not too far from her building. She quickly runs towards Rose's apartment and asks to spend the night there because she feels like she's in danger, especially now that Paul is not around. Rose lets her in and leads Chloe to her daughter's room where she can pass the night. The next morning, Rose wakes her up and informs her that there's someone here to see her. Paul walks in, carrying Milo, and Chloe is delighted to see her cat once again. Strangely, Paul, who doesn't like cats, is carrying Milo in his arms. They return to their apartment, and Chloe brings up the topic of his twin brother and Sandra. She confesses that she searched his things and found out about them. Paul doesn't want to talk about all of that. Tears well up in his eyes as he blames Sandra for being fascinated by Delord's twin. He feels she's in love with Louis, and she was only interested in him because of his brother. Chloe looks at him intently as the things he's saying are beginning to sound like he's talking to her. She suddenly jerks up and realizes that it's all a dream. Then she sees Rose sitting and waiting for her to wake up with a plate of cake in her hand. Chloe quickly gets up and runs to her apartment. She's taking her bath when Paul calls her on the phone. He sounds angry and confronts her for lying to him about Agnes Wexler. He questions if he's the father of the child she's carrying, and Chloe instantly knows that Louis must be responsible for Paul knowing all about it. She ends the call and picks up the gun in Paul's drawer. She heads straight for Louis's office with rage pumping through her veins. She enters the office bedroom and finds him sitting right there, waiting for her. Chloe notices that his cat is still alive. She accuses him of being a monster after all he did to Sandra. Louis reveals that Sandra was also impregnated by him, just like her. He lets out a wicked smile as he blames Sandra for lying and keeping secrets from his brother. He begins to taunt her and tells her how she reminds him so much of Sandra whenever he looks at her. Chloe feels enraged. She brings out her gun and points it at him. Just then, Louis lets his brother out from behind the door. Chloe is confused, not knowing who Paul or Louis is. The twins blame her for desiring both of them, just like Sandra did. They order her to lie on the bed so they can give her exactly what she wants from them. Louis tells his brother everything, and Paul blames her for not telling him the truth. Their words are beginning to mess with her head because she can't differentiate them as they both claim to be Paul. She points the weapon to her head and they just tell her that it's exactly what Sandra did too. Louis reminds her that she is carrying his child, so she quickly points the gun at him. He keeps taunting her, leading Chloe to pull the trigger on him. Instantly, the baby in her womb begins to move aggressively. It tears her belly and begins to push its tiny fingers out. Chloe instantly blanks out. Could it be that she is seeing things once again? By the time she opens her eyes again, she's being wheeled into the operating room. Her mother comes to the hospital and waits outside with Paul, hoping that nothing bad happens to her. After the operation, the doctor calls Paul and Chloe's mother into her office. She shows them an image of the cyst that has been removed from Chloe's body, which affected her baby. The doctor explains that Chloe's mother was carrying 2 fetuses. Unfortunately, the weaker one was absorbed by Chloe because it wasn't developing normally. The information moves Chloe's mother to tears, as she was unaware of all these before now. They soon get up to go meet Chloe, who does not warm up to her mother when she comes to kiss her cheek. Chloe reveals to Paul that she read on the internet that she's a parasitic twin and she had eaten up her sister in the womb. Tears flow down her cheek as she thinks about her twin sister. On their way out of the hospital, her mother apologizes for not being there for her. She promises to be more involved and available in her life. Then, they embrace each other before going their separate ways. She gets in the car with Paul, who drives them home. That night they get intimate and Chloe starts seeing things again. This time, she sees Milo sitting on the couch in the bedroom and then, an image of her twin sister moving closer in the mirror. She watches as the reflection looks at both her and Paul making out, and then suddenly begins to bang the mirror until it cracks into pieces.